Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and of course we're back at the clutter zone, and we're continuing work on this, which is our what appears to be the original release of Tamiya's original F-16 model. This dates back to 1976, according to the engravings on the sprue, and I'm assuming that this was probably produced sometime in the first 2 or 3 years after they did the tooling, and I don't think Tamiya really ever released it that much after that. So this is where we are so far. We have the cockpit together. The seat is just in there loosely, and one of the decisions I was having to make is what are we going to do with the intake, because you can look right up inside there and see nothing. And if you look at a picture of an F-16 intake, you can actually see the front of the engine in there. So I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to scratch build something resembling the front of an F-16 engine. So let's get started on that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out 2 circles of the approximate diameter of the front of the engine intake. One's going to be a heavier piece of sheet styrene, and another one is going to be a much thinner piece. And I'm going to be using one of my least favorite modeling tools, which is my Olfa circle cutter, which is a device which promises a lot and usually goes awry, mainly because it's made out of plastic and you oftentimes get some distortion as you're using it. So what I usually try to do is I usually try to get a clean scribe, and then I come along later and I clean up the cut, as opposed to trying to cut all the way through using this. Now, according to Wikipedia, the diameter of the widest part of an F-100 engine and the widest part of its replacement engine is 118 centimeters. Please excuse my metric. It's just a whole lot easier to use centimeters because you can just simply apply a mathematical formula to it and you still get centimeters. You don't have to kind of go from feet to inches and everything like that. But at any rate, if we take 118 centimeters and we divide it by 48, which will give us the size that we need for 1/48 scale, we come up with 2.4 centimeters or 24 millimeters. So we have to knock that in half to set our distance here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cut 2 discs at 1.2 centimeters or 12 millimeters. So I usually try to avoid putting a lot of pressure on the blade. All I really want to do is just basically scribe it, just so that I can later on cut to that line and then sand it to a better circle. Alright, so let's see if I can focus in on this. Okay, yep, you can see the line there. So that's not as terrible as it often is. Now, even a curved scribed line will behave the same as a straight line when it comes to styrene. It provides a point at which stress builds up. So you should be able to, even with a fairly mild scribed line, you should be able to fold it. You can see it starting to come away right here. And it's already starting to peel around. So, oh, look at that. We've almost got it all the way out. So, I'm just going to come back with a cutter and I'll clean that up because it probably wasn't quite scribed as deep as I would have liked. So here's our disc of the heavier material. Now I'm going to do the one out of the thinner material. And now we have our thinner piece. Now the backing piece, it's just basically here for structure. The front piece here, this hopefully is going to turn into our compressor blades. And this is one of these things where I have a vague idea of what I want to do. and I'm just winging it. So whether or not you take this as a definitive how to scratch build a turbine engine is up to you. But we'll see how this turns out. Now, before we go any farther, it might be a good idea to make sure that this mythical engine that I'm creating is going to fit inside here. And this should be approximately where it is. It doesn't come right up to the front of the inlet. It actually sets back a bit. And basically, this engine has to fit inside this space that you see here above the landing gear bay. So if it fits in there, then we know it would fit inside the engine, or fit inside the fuselage, rather. So this is looking like it's going to fit in here okay. And it's actually going in, slightly about half. I might actually end up cementing it just onto the front of this bay, just to give it a good mounting point. One of the parts we're going to need is basically the bullet that goes at the very front of a jet engine. Now, there are some that look very pointed and some are more rounded, but we basically need a shape like this to start with. Now, I'm only going to need just the very, very tip of this. The rest of it's going to be garbage. And this came off of a kit that I'm never going to finish, mainly because I don't have a canopy for it. So I'm going to cut this across, maybe blunt it down a little bit, because I think the F-16 ones don't have a very pointy front on this. So there's our next step. After some filing and sanding, you can see how much I reduced the sharpness of the end of this. This is more of what I'm looking for. Now, I've just set that bullet down in the middle of my structural disc, just to get some idea as to whether that's the size I want. And I think it is. I think it's about what I'm looking for there. Now, this looks like a mess, because it is. But this is the thin sheet that's going to be my compressor blades. What I did is I centered my bullet on there as best I could. And this is actually going to be the back side. And then I just took a Sharpie and I colored all around it. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut straight lines all the way across, or I should say, starting with where the bullet is out to the edge. So I don't want anything blocking this hole, because that's going to tell me where my center point is. But I'm not actually going to be going into this white area. So eventually it will become clear as to what I'm trying to do. This establishes my center point that I won't be cutting to, and this establishes where I want to start my cuts for my blades to come out of. Hopefully this illustrates the point a little bit more. As you can see, I've done a cut going from one side to the other, but stopping in that white area. And if I do one at 90 degrees and then I keep on halving the distance, I will hopefully end up with a whole pile of little pies that are approximately the same size. Now we have it in quarters. Now we have eighths. And now we have sixteenths. I'm going to try to do one more set of divisions. As you can see, some of them are coming out slightly bigger than others. We'll see how it looks on the next pass. Okay, there we can see all the cuts have been made. Now, some of my slices were a little fatter than they should have been. So there's actually more than, I don't know, I think what we're supposed to be up to 32 blades here. There's actually a few more than that. And here you can see the back side of it. So the next step will be to glue our bullet on. And then I'm going to put a small spacer between this and our backing plate. And then from there, I'm going to give each of these blades a little bit of a twist, and probably something underneath them to put them all at the same angle. We'll see how that goes. Now I've put a little circular backing plate just to create some distance between our compressor blades and the main backing plate. And that'll give us some space to twist these blades. Now looking on an edge on, you can see what we've accomplished. Now here I'm starting to put the pitch into the turbine blades. Now this turbine definitely has a good side and a bad side. This side is not very good. This side is. So I'm starting on the crappy side that nobody's ever really going to see once I put the model together. And I'm kind of refining my technique. So what you see here is some very fine plastic rod that I'm shoving underneath one edge of the blades. And if we look at it edge on, hopefully you can see what's going on here. So I'm going with a piece of rod that I'm really wasting half the plastic here, but I need to have some sort of a handle as I shove it in there. So I'm putting it in there, putting a dab of glue in, and then I'm basically pushing the turbine blade down to get the angle you're going to have on every single one of them. And we'll see if it looks better once we get down here to the area where the blades are more regular sized. So now that we're getting into the area where the size of the blades are a little bit more regular, the appearance is starting to look a little bit better. We won't really know until I get them all in and trim off all those extra little rods that are helping to set the angle. I've got about half of the blades pitched now because it goes from this one here, I've trimmed a few all the way around to here. And I'm definitely getting better, which is good because like I said, I only need half of this really. The top half is not going to be seen, so if I learn on that part, then that's a good thing. Okay, so there's all my rods installed that are giving me the simulated pitch. I've already cut off the excess material from the top here. Now, once again, it's fortunate that I only need the bottom end of this engine because the top isn't that great. But you know what? Everything is a learning experience, and I could go back and make a completely new one, but I really don't need to. I only need the bottom of this to show. I really just continued on to the top end just for practice, so that if I ever have to make another one of these, I'll probably be a little bit better at it. So I've let everything dry, because believe me, this was pretty soft from cement before cutting off all those little rods that were making it have the right pitch. Now I'm just going to put a tiny bit of putty on a couple of the turbine blades that were maybe scrunched with my fingernail. I've given the compressor wheel a coat of Tester's lacquer primer just to see if I really need to do any more cleaning up. There's a couple blades that are certainly not perfect, and I've already said the upper half I'm not worried about because nobody's going to be able to see that. So, because this one little part here is already taking up way more time than I thought I was going to. So the next step will be to wrap the outside of it with a piece of styrene that will represent the outside casing, because of course this is all we're going to see. You don't have to build the whole engine. Now I wrapped the front of the engine here with some evergreen half-round styrene, and I made sure that my join was up here at the top where my crappy blades are, because nobody's going to see anything above the bullet. So, like I said, I'm fortunate in that only a portion of the blades are going to be seen here. Inside the fuselage, I've installed a piece of right angle and a bit of a blanking plate, and I'm going to paint this whole area up inside here that very, very light gray. And I've done the same thing with the other side of the fuselage right here. And that way when I mount the turbine in front of it, it will look less like it's just kind of floating in nowhere. Mistakes. I've been painting the air intake light gray, but I just decided to double check things, and you know what? 99% of F-16 air intakes seem to be painted white. So I guess I'm going to have to start painting this white. Drat. It was already white. Now here's the front of our engine. It's all painted up. and ready to be installed. And really, we're only going to see a sliver of this. Mistake undone. The air intake is now a nice, lovely gloss white. I think maybe there should be a corollary to the old measure twice, cut once, and it should be check twice, paint once. And check what color something is supposed to be twice, and then paint it. So I think I'm finally ready to put that engine inside there and button up a fuselage halves. Now, before we install this in the fuselage and button it up and, for the most part, hide it away for the rest of its existence, I thought I'd compare it to this here. Now, this is out of a very old kit of an F-8U Crusader, and it's the front of a Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet engine. And it probably isn't 100% accurate, well, neither is mine, but it certainly gives an example of how much larger the first turbine is, the primary fan is on this compared to the first set of compressors in this jet here. Of course, this is a turbofan engine, this is a turbojet, but it certainly is an interesting point. I was actually looking for this before making this up. I couldn't find it, so I ended up building this one, and then I found this one actually, I don't know, 3 feet away from where I was just by accident, and I was like, oh, well, isn't that special? Oh, well. Of course, really, it resembles this in no way whatsoever, so I couldn't have used it. Now, what is it that Murphy said? Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. At this point, I thought I was going to be showing you a nice down-the-throat shot here so you could see the engine front in place. Now, I had glued the engine in place using some super glue and couldn't make sure that it was absolutely solidly in place because, of course, I knew things would shift a bit when the fuselage went together. So before running glue over all the seams, I did hopefully make sure that it was in place. Halfway through the gluing, this happened. Yep, that's the engine front rattling around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a very small hole right there. And that's right at about the back of the engine. So that way I'll be able to access it, run some glue inside there, and then I know the tweezers will fit down inside there to make sure that that it can be put into the right spot. Complications. So there's our hole, and I ran a copious quantity of super glue up into there, and it doesn't seem to be rattling anymore, so we'll call that a win. Now I'll put a very, very small square of styrene over top of that hole, and that should cover that over. And now I can finally give you that view that I wanted to give. Let's see, there we go. So now we can actually see that there's an engine up inside there. It looks like this beastie can actually work. And I'll even put the final lip on there, and you can still see it residing in there looking like it should. There's my patch covering up the glue hole I needed to drill. Now, I'd just like to say a word about the fit of the fuselage halves. Not perfect, a tiny bit of misalignment. I've already sanded this area here. Gonna require a little bit of putty there, but there are a couple other small imperfections that need to be addressed with putty. There's a little bit of a dent there. There's definitely some divots behind the cockpit. That seems to be a common place where there's sinkholes in any jet fighter for some reason or other. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get around to airbrushing the landing gear bays flat white. I'm going to get that done out of the way, and then that way I can move on to more of the final assembly, but I want to get that done at an earlier stage. So our landing gear bays have been painted flat white, and let's get our tape off. See how it looks. Not sure how necessary the tape was, because it's white already. But I felt better putting it on. I think this will probably make for a better base for putting a wash on than the bare plastic will. Now, I've done an initial scraping of the seam with a number 11 blade, and it's surprising how very little filler we're going to need. A tiny bit along there, some down here. This is probably going to be the toughest bit, is touching up the tail hook. And on the upper side, as I said, these little divots here, not really going to have to do any filling here, which is good because with the panel lines being raised, it'd be really difficult to reinstate them if I sanded them off, but they look pretty good. And there's our putty applied. It looks far worse than it really is. Probably the least amount of filling I've ever had to do on an airplane. Though I am thinking it's probably about time to get a new tube of putty, because this stuff is starting to get kind of thick and globby. So I've just edited together most of this episode of Dan's Model Works, and I've discovered that we're pretty much at the 20-minute mark right now. How time does fly. So I think that's about enough for this week. I have sanded the putty and lost very, very little of the panel lines. And once again, we've got our engine in place here. Now, if it seems like the engine took a long time to build, it really only took about maybe 2 hours of actual labor on my part, and that was spread over the last 5 or 6 days. So, until next week, thanks for watching Dan's Model Works, and keep on modeling.